Well, in case you didn't notice, and I think you did, this is a weekend that we are celebrating our kids and our kids' ministry. Because here at New Life, we believe that our kids are not just the church of tomorrow, but they are the church of right here, right now. And they are important and vital. And the ministry that goes on with our kids is so crucial. And we see our kids engaging in worship. We see them serving in our community. They're fully entering in. And so we just want to celebrate them this weekend. And we also want to kind of challenge you that maybe this is your opportunity to get connected, to get involved, maybe to make a difference in the life of a child. So we're going to show you a little video right now, and this is of our littlest kids, our nursery and New Life Little Kids area, and sit back and just watch what happens with them on a regular basis.
There is so much noise that fights for my attention, begging me to listen, but will I choose to listen? All familiar sounds of doubt and fear and anger that threaten me with danger, but will I run from danger? When I know you love me is when I find that I'm free to love the way you love me, love the way you love. Love be the loudest voice I hear, the loudest voice I hear, the loudest voice I hear. And love is drowning out my fear, drowning out my fear. It's the loudest voice I hear. The loudest voice I hear. There's really just one word that says what we're all seeking. Love is what we needed. Love is what we needed. It meets us where we are and puts us back together. Love's the only answer. Yeah, love's the only answer. Love be the loudest voice I hear, the loudest voice I hear, the loudest voice I hear. And love is drowning out my fear, drowning out my fear. It's the loudest voice I hear. The loudest voice I hear. Love be the loudest. Love be the loudest. Love be the loudest voice I hear. Love be the loudest. Love be the loudest. Love be the loudest voice I hear. When I know you love me is when I find that I'm free to love the way you love me, love the way you love. Love be the loudest voice I hear, the loudest voice I hear, the loudest voice I hear. And love is drowning out my fear, drowning out my fear. It's the loudest voice I hear. Love be the loudest, love be the loudest, love be the loudest, the loudest voice I hear. Love be the loudest, love be the loudest, love be the loudest, the loudest voice I hear. Love be the loudest, love be the loudest, love be the loudest voice I hear.
Now, I want you to think about this. Yeah, give him a hand. That was good. Think about this for a moment, though. You, in serving God, could hold a baby. Isn't that incredible? Some of you aren't even going to hear the rest of this message because you're thinking, those babies are so stinking cute. I mean, I could do that for God? Yes, you can. And after the service, you're going to have a chance to go back and find out a little more. But here's the thing. Just caring for a baby, just loving a kid can make a huge difference. Something so small. I mean, it just seems so little, but it's so big. And isn't that the way that things often work? The littlest things make the biggest difference in our lives. Well, we're going to kind of dive into that today. So in your program, you'll find a note-taking sheet, and I want you to get that out today. And if you have a pen or pencil, I want you to get that out as well, and you can follow along. If you have your Bible, I want you to get that out, and I want you to turn to the book of John chapter 6. And John is the fourth book in the New Testament, so it's the latter half of the Bible. And you see Matthew, Mark, Luke, and then John. I want you to turn to John chapter 6. And it's going to take us a few minutes to get there, but just kind of hold tight because I want you to see it with your own eyes. Now, while you're getting all those things ready, I have one other thing I want you to do. I want you to get your phone out, and I want you to go to whatever social media you use, and I want you to go ahead and check in. We don't do that I don't ask you to do that for us, it's for you, so that your circle of friends, the people that you're connected with, will see that you are in church today. And we're actually going to talk about this whole thing today, not about social media, but how the smallest things can bring the biggest rewards. And something as small as checking in may just trigger a series of events that allows you to have a conversation. It may speak hope and life to someone in your circle of friends. So go ahead and check in, and then go ahead and turn your phone off or to silent or whatever you need to do as we dive into this series we're in called Brave. And we have been looking at individuals throughout the Bible that have taken these steps of courage and strength and bravery to make a difference. And it wasn't by their own power, but it was their trust in God that allowed them to say, you know what, God, I'm afraid. I'm not sure what's next. I don't know what's around the corner, but I'm going to trust you and take this next step. And that is the beginning of bravery. But we're going to look today at how these smallest things can bring the largest results. How many of you remember Apollo 13? Anyone do? How many of you remember it really, not the movie? Right? Okay, there we go. Some of you remember the movie, and there was a famous line in this movie. Does anyone know what it is? Houston, we have a problem. You remember that? One of the fuel tanks, as they stirred the mixture, kind of blew, and it blew them completely kind of off course. And it was a miracle that this crew of astronauts ever returned to Earth, and especially safely. It was this crazy thing. But I don't know if you're aware of what really happened in that scenario. It's called, in kind of a larger context, a cascade event. And what a cascade event is that one little thing happens, which triggers a bunch of other little things. It's like a domino effect. And one thing leads to a bunch of other things until they add up to something huge and often catastrophic. And the first issue for Apollo 13 was way back in the construction phase. The fuel tank dropped. Now, I know when I first read that, it's like, that doesn't seem like a little thing to me. That seems like a huge thing. But you know how far it dropped? 2 inches. As they were doing all the construction, that tank dropped 2 inches. But somehow in that 2 inches, there was an internal mechanism that got tweaked a little bit. And when they were actually in flight and they mixed that fuel, it triggered one thing, which triggered the next. And then something failed and a sensor collapsed. And all these things happened till you have this amazing catastrophic event that could have taken so many lives. Something small, and it changed everything. Think about all the other things in your life. You came here today, most likely in a car, and in that car, these little things called spark plugs. If you don't know what that is, just trust me, your car has them. And your car won't run if it doesn't have spark plugs. I don't care how nice your car looks. I don't care how great your stereo system is, or if you have, video panels in there. If you don't have a spark plug, the car is going nowhere except behind a tow truck. I mean, that's just the way it works. You have sitting in your pocket right now probably a phone. And in that phone, there's a microchip. And you have one in your tablet or your computer as well. And that microchip holds billions, that's with a B, billions of bits of information. And that microchip is smaller than your thumbnail. I mean, the smallest things have huge repercussions. Athletes lose races by fractions of seconds. Politicians lose elections by literally, a handful of votes. Your vacuum cleaner at home won't run if there's just one little screw missing. It just keeps adding up. Little things matter. And they have big effects. And if you look back all through the Bible, you'll find this same kind of pattern developing. That's mainly because God looks at what's inside of us, not just what's visible and outside of us. God doesn't look at how big a house that you have. He doesn't really care how much money you have. Your educational levels are wonderful, but God's looking at something deeper than that because, again, he knows that big things often come in little packages. Now think about, I'm going to kind of come back to some people through Scripture in this Brave series. And again, we're going to get to John 6 in a second. But think about this. In the Old Testament, there was a guy named Moses. And Moses was born a Hebrew in a foreign country. And he was, through a series of events, raised in Pharaoh's court. And there was one moment when he was out watching his fellow countrymen work away at slave labor. And he saw this Egyptian kind of overlord completely beating this Hebrew. And he was so incensed by that he went to go and to stop and ended up in a fight and ended up killing the Egyptian. A series of events go on. He runs away from that because, of course, he's going to be hunted because of his crime. He ends up going away into the kind of the wilderness. He gets married, he settles down, and he becomes a shepherd. And one day, he sees the strangest thing he's ever seen. He sees a bush that is burning, but it's not being consumed. It's not something he's ever seen in his life, and none of us have seen it either. And then out of this burning bush, this voice speaks, and it's God. And God tells Moses that he wants to send him back to Pharaoh, who was the most preeminent leader of the world at that time. And he wants to send him back so that his people, this Israelite nation, can be set free. And Moses goes, he's never going to believe me. He's never going to respond to me. Now, Moses didn't want to go anyway, but he's just kind of in this arguing point with God saying, there's no way any of that's going to happen. And this is where the Lord first kind of brings into play this little thing. And in Exodus chapter 4, the Lord speaks to Moses and says this, what do you have there in your hand? And Moses says, well, I have a shepherd's staff. You know what those are. You've seen pictures of them. It was just kind of a stout piece of wood, and they would use that in the shepherding profession. They would use it to help drive the sheep. They would use it to help drive away, predators. It would help the shepherd walk up a steep slope. I mean, all of those different things. But it didn't seem like much when you're talking about the most preeminent ruler of the known world at that time. Like, what is my shepherd's staff going to do? Now, I believe the conversation there was a little bit more to it. I'm not doubting what the Bible has to say. Don't get me wrong on that. But in the Dave version, I'm thinking there was probably more to the conversation. In fact, what I think happened is that God looked at Moses and says, what do you have there in your hand? And you know what Moses said? Nothing. And he's got a staff in his hand, but he's looking at it going, I don't have anything. He always had this. It's just a stick. And so when God asked him, I think he probably just went, nothing. And God went, Moses, please, look in your hand. It's like, oh yeah, I have a shepherd's staff there. And here's the crazy thing. It doesn't seem like anything, right? It's a stick. But that was before God used that to do something great. God used that shepherd's staff to show his power to Pharaoh and his leaders. And you can go back and read about it, how he would throw that staff down and God would do this miraculous thing with it. And he would pick it back up and another miracle would happen. I mean, God used this stick. Later, God would use that staff in Moses' hand to do something dramatic. And if you're around my age, you probably grew up once a year watching on television the 10 Commandments, right? With Charlton Heston. If you're younger, you don't even know who Charlton Heston is. That's okay. But he was this actor, and it was this grand, kind of movie with, at the time, stunning special effects. Now we wouldn't even think about it, but back then it was like, wow. And there's this scene where Moses, Charlton Heston, would hold that staff out over the Red Sea. And remember that moment when the water backs up, and that really happened. And the people walked through on dry ground. And I know as you hear that, you're thinking, Dave, it wasn't the stick. It wasn't the staff. That piece of wood didn't do anything. It wasn't magical. It didn't have any power. You know that it was God. And I would say this to you. You're exactly right. God took what Moses had, which he was dismissing and say, it's really nothing. But he used it to do something powerful. There's another great character in the Old Testament, and his name was David. And in 1 Samuel 17, you don't need to turn there, but we find the story of David and Goliath. And we've even taken in our culture the idea of a David and Goliath, and we've turned it into a cultural phrase, right? It's something big against something little. It's a little mom and pop organization against the multinational corporation. And we understand that phrase, big versus little, and a fighting chance. But in the real story, the Israelites had been attacked, and they were under siege by these Philistines. And every day, this Goliath, this huge guy, would come out, and he would taunt the Israelites, and he would trash them. It was total trash talking. And he would trash them and trash their nation, and then he would trash God. But who wants to go out and fight this guy? Nobody can win against him. So David, who's a young man at this time, his dad sends him to bring supplies up to his brothers who were in the army. And David arrives one morning right about the time that Goliath is coming out, and he hears all this trash talking that Goliath is doing. And all the army, they're sitting behind the rocks, going, oh, here it is again. And David says, aren't any of you going to do anything about this? And they're like, yeah, we're really going to do something about this guy. What can we do? He's huge. He's calling us out to single combat. None of us could win. And so David, this kid, says, I'll fight him. And they're going, yeah, right. That's nice of you. He goes, no, seriously, I'll fight this guy. And they're looking at him thinking, you're crazy. You're little, David, and he's huge. And I know what they were thinking. David, you've got nothing to bring to the battle. You've got nothing to bring to the fight. But David said, yeah, I do. And he picks up his bag, and he picks up his sling, and he goes and he gets 5 stones. And you know how the story ends, even if you've never read the Bible and never been in church, that David ends up killing Goliath, and he saves the nation. But here's the crazy part. David didn't walk around saying, look at this sling. Look at this sling. Man, I've done some incredible things with this sling, and I've got it. He didn't do a little end zone dance and puff out his chest and say, I've got it, I'm going to take this guy down. He didn't. He didn't even mention his sling when talking to the king and to his brothers and even to Goliath. Do you know what he actually says? He says, do you know who my God is? Do you know who my God is? And he says this isn't my battle. This is his battle. And he's going to use this. David had faith that God was with him, and he had the courage to see this battle through. And those little items, whether it was a shepherd's staff for Moses or a sling for David, those counted for a lot in this battle. They were what tipped the scales because God was using the littlest things that were made available to him. So let's get there in John chapter 6. Here's this situation that's happening, and Jesus has been teaching and walking, and he has been gaining this crowd of followers who are amazed by what he does and what he says. And as he gathers his crew together, he has done some teaching, and there is this vast crowd of people. In fact, while we don't know the exact number, it says that there are 5,000 men in attendance. Now, before you're offended, that was just simply the way that they would count in those days. I know you may not agree with it. I don't really either, but that's just the cultural thing. But we know that there were men and there were women and there were children. So there could have been in excess of 10, 12, 15,000 people there. And they're all gathered together. They've all been walking all day. They've listened to this teaching. And so Jesus turns and he says, hey, the people are hungry. And then he asks this question, where are we going to find food to feed them? And the disciples are like, what? We're supposed to feed them? Oh, man, we weren't in for that. I mean, we're your followers and everything, but we don't have that much food. And they start thinking, it's like, well, first of all, there's not that much food around here for this big of a crowd. And the second thing is, do you know how much money it would take to do that? It's impossible. Philip even says that. It's going to take a lot of money. We just can't do it. What if we just send them off to the villages? They can fend for themselves. I mean, we're not responsible for them, are we? And then one of his disciples named Andrew, he looks over and he sees this kid in the crowd. And maybe this kid is getting ready to eat. And he brings this kid to Jesus and he says, this boy has 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And it's almost like this moment where it's like, where are we going to get the food? And he goes, hey, this kid's got 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And then it's like suddenly he realizes what he says. And he says, but that's not going to do much good, is it? I mean, this crowd is too big. I mean, what in the world? What was I thinking? 5 loaves and 2 fishes. But this kid has made them available. And here's what's crazy. They've already seen Jesus do miraculous things. They've seen him heal lepers, and they've seen him things that have never been seen before. They've watched Jesus do them. But somehow, this feeding of this crowd is just way out of context. It's just way too much. It's like, hey, I know Jesus can do miracles, but you got to give him more to work with. You can't just give him a few loaves and fish. And Jesus says, bring me his lunch. Now, here's what's interesting. We don't really know anything else about this kid. We don't know his name. We don't know where he's from. We don't know how his life turned out. There's no end to the story where at the end of John we come back and it's like, and this man was the kid who brought the... We don't get that part. So we don't know anything else about this kid. We don't even get to see his interaction with Andrew and the disciples. He has 0 dialogue in this whole encounter. But here's what I think. I like to think that this kid saw what was going on. Maybe he overheard part of the discussion, and he pulls on Andrew's coat, and he says, hey, it's not much, but I've got my lunch here, and if Jesus wants it, it's his. I don't know if that's what took place, but somehow the lunch got from the kid to Jesus. I had a guy last night after the service come up and say, you know what I've always wondered about? This kid had 5 loaves and 2 fishes. What mom sends 5 loaves of bread with 1 kid, you know? Obviously, they're not on like some carb restriction diet because this is not making sense at all. But like, who gives their kid 5 loaves of bread? Now, these weren't like giant loaves. They would have been like rolls or something. But that's still a lot of bread for a kid. And she sends it with it. And maybe he was going to share his lunch with some friends. You know, who knows what's going on? But he says, here's my lunch. I'm going to give it to Jesus. And here's Jesus, the one who specializes in using little things, the one who specializes in using unremarkable people, the one who doesn't go to the rulers and to the movers and shakers of culture, but he goes to fishermen and tax collectors, the one who takes what is seemingly impossible and suddenly makes it possible. And if you're there in John chapter 6, I want to start at verse 10 because I want you to see what happens in this story. And I know many of you have heard this before, but I want you just to catch it again. Tell everyone to sit down, Jesus ordered. So all of them, the men alone, numbered 5,000, sat down on the grassy slopes. Then Jesus took the loaves and he gave thanks to God and he passed them out to the people. Afterwards, he did the same with the fish, and they all ate until they were full. Now gather the leftovers, Jesus told his disciples, so that nothing is wasted. I think that's an important thing. Nothing is wasted. There were only 5 barley loaves to start with, but 12 baskets were filled with the pieces of bread the people didn't eat. Now imagine you had 5 small loaves of bread and you start tearing them up. Can I just tell you this? It doesn't matter how small you tear those pieces. 5 loaves don't fill up 12 baskets, right? 5 loaves wouldn't even fill up 1 basket. Jesus took this little thing, this small lunch, and he made it a feast with leftovers. And it says the people ate till they were full. You see, God can use the littlest thing and not even use it all up. He takes the little that we have and he makes it more powerful than we can possibly imagine. But here's where the brave part comes in. It's this: are we willing to trust God with what we have? We think, but I'm going to lose it. But did you see in all these things? He uses it and there's still leftover. But are you willing to trust him with what you have? Are we willing to offer sometimes the little that we have, even the parts that we discount and say, nothing could ever come of that? Because see, our tendency is to do that, is to actually tell God what he can and can't do. God, there's no way you can use someone like me. There's no way that you can take this little I have and do something. So we remove it from the equation. And God's just saying, will you trust me in this? That kid could have said, hey, there's too many people. It's just my lunch. It's all I have. And what do we say? We make our own excuses too, right? We had some folks up here today, incredible musicians and vocalists and all those things. And you could look and you could go, well, I can't sing. I can't play an instrument. I can't do anything like that. So how could God use me? Or you see myself or our team get up on a regular basis and teach or speak, and you think, I don't ever want to get up in front of people. It just freaks me out completely. So thus, maybe God can't use someone like me. And so again, we discount. Or what do we say? I'm just a student. I'm just a kid. I'm divorced. I don't have much education. Dave, my past is pretty messed up, and on and on and on. And we're already telling God exactly why he can't use us. And he is ready and he's willing to do something extraordinary if we'll just say yes. If we'll just say yes. We're so quick to say no. No. But he's saying, will you just say yes and trust me? So I'm going to give you two things. I want you to write these down, okay? The first is this. Am I brave enough to step out and trust God? Am I brave enough to step out and trust God? See, that ultimately is the question. Not what your resume looks like or what your skill set is, but simply, are you willing to step out? God asked Moses, what do you have in your hand? Well, nothing really. It's just a staff. And God, while didn't say these words, the implication is this: will you let me use it? David with the sling. David, will you let me use that? The little boy with the lunch. Will you let me use that? And whatever you bring to the table, God's asking, will you let me use that? And you think, but I don't know how to put all those things into play. It's all right. It starts with a willingness to take a step and to trust God. I know some of you grew up in church, some of you didn't grow up in church, but probably for most of us in this room, there were moments when at least some family member maybe took us to some type of religious environment, right? Maybe your parents took you a couple times a year to Mass, maybe it was around holidays, Christmas and Easter. Maybe your grandparents took you to church once in a while, or you were in Sunday school. I don't know, we all come from different backgrounds. But you think back in your life, and there were people who made an impact and a difference in your life. Again, it might have been the grandparent or the parent, may have been a coach, may have been a teacher, may have been a concerned adult, an aunt or an uncle, who simply said you were worth it and willing to give themselves. I remember growing up, and we went to church, and I remember when I was about third or fourth grade, I don't remember exactly, there was this guy who was, and I don't even know his whole story, but at some point along the line, he said, I'd be willing to help out. And so they put him in charge of fourth grade boys, which I think is just cruel, really. And so here's this, group of us fourth grade boys, and I don't know, what was that, 10, 11, 12, something like that, And so we're in this class, and can I tell you, his name was Mr. Lynn. Mr. Lynn. And I'll tell you this, I don't remember anything that Mr. Lynn taught. I don't remember a single lesson that he laid out. I don't remember any, activity that we did. I mean, it's all a blur. And I realize that's probably me getting older, but I just don't remember any of that. But here's what I do remember about Mr. Lynn. He was there week after week. Again, don't remember specific lessons that he taught. Don't remember any of those specific things. I just remember that Mr. Lynn was there week after week after week. And sometimes the biggest step we can take is saying, I'm just willing to be there. I'm just willing to make an impact. And I'm sure he prepared, and I'm sure, he took some time each week to get ready for these fourth grade boys, or else take a nap or something. I don't know what he had to do to get ready for fourth grade boys, but he did. And he made an impact. And I know that I had other people that, influenced my life. Some I can't remember at all. There are teachers in school that I just vaguely remember, but some of them stand out a little bit, that there was something about them and their character and who they were. I don't remember phrases, don't remember any specific teaching, but their lives made an impact on me. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to say yes to God and let your life impact someone, maybe impact a kid, maybe impact the next generation, that you could leave a legacy. after our service last night, I had a guy who came up. He's a young man, he's in his 20s, and he came and he said, Dave, I remember about 3 or 4 years ago, and he had just started coming here, and he said, I'd finished school, I got my first really career job, and he says, I'm a nerd. I mean, that's his phrase. He goes, I'm a nerd, I'm a computer programmer, that's what I do all day long. And you talked about making an impact on students or on kids, and I just thought, there's no way God could use that. And he goes, and he pulled up his phone and he had notes from this message of like 3 years ago. And it's like, what are you doing? And he had all these things there. And he said, you know what you told us? He said, you told us that we needed to be fat. And it's like, did I really say that? Because I don't remember saying that. And he says, well, it was an acronym. And you said we needed to be faithful, available, and teachable. And I thought, that was good. I liked that. I should remember that. But he said, I remember thinking, but it can't be me. It can't be me. And he said, what you said again tonight was the same thing. It's like, are you willing to take a step? And so 3 years ago, he stepped in to say, I'm willing to help with junior high students. And he did. And he's been there ever since. And he goes, there's times it's hard. There's times I want to bail. And he goes, and I sometimes feel like, am I saying the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? I'm not that kind of person. He says, but the one thing you told me over and over again, your being there makes a difference. He says, so week after week, I come and I'm there and I have a chance to influence. And he goes, now I watch these junior hires that are in high school and some of them are going to be getting ready to graduate. And I was thinking, I got to play a part in their life. But it all starts with this willingness to say, okay, I'm in, regardless of what you bring or what you have. I want to read you a passage from 1 Corinthians 1, and this is the Apostle Paul speaking. And this is the Message translation, and I love what he has to say. Now, I want you to catch this. He says this, take a good look, friends, at who you were when you got called into this life. I don't see many of the brightest and the best among you, right? And you read that and go, hey, wait a minute, That gets personal here. And he says, not many influential, not many high society families. Isn't it obvious that God deliberately chose men and women that culture overlooks and exploits and abuses? And he chose these nobodies to expose the hollow pretensions of the somebodies. That makes it quite clear that none of you can get by with blowing your own horn before God. Everything we have, right thinking and right living, a clean slate and a fresh start comes from God by way of Jesus Christ. See, your life and my life counts. We talk a lot around here about being lights to the world, about letting people know we're part of God's family and everywhere we go, in everything we do. Over and over, we say that our call is to love people one step closer to Jesus. And sometimes you may get discouraged in that as you try to live this life of faith, but don't, because your example, your faith may not seem like a big deal to you, and it may be imperfect. In fact, it is imperfect, just like mine is. And it may seem that it's just this little thing that you're doing, this little step of saying, I'm going to trust you, God, but it counts in the kingdom of God. It makes an impact. It makes a difference. And you, with a willingness to say, I don't know that I have what it takes. I don't know very much. I don't know the Bible really well, but I'm willing to trust you, God, and take the little that I have and put it in your hands. In fact, that's number 2. Will you write it down? Will I be brave and put who I am and what I have in God's hands? Will I be brave and put who I am and what I have in God's hands? You see, everyone is important to God. And you may think that your gifts and your talents and your abilities are a little thing, maybe not much in the grand scheme of things, but I want you to think seriously about this. What would happen if you and your abilities and your gifts disappeared today? How would you be missed? And before you say, well, not much, let me go back to the previous point I made. The impact that God can make through your willingness to step up and trust him touches others. And it's like a ripple effect. It's like that cascade event in reverse. That the one little thing you do can spur so many other things. And I think back to the Mr. Lynn's, and I think back to the Ray Jens and the people in my life who spoke truth and hope and life. And again, don't remember specific messages, but they were there and they were consistent. And they cared about who I was and they made an impact on me. And I am here today partly because of their faithfulness. And what if they hadn't been there? And you say, well, somebody else would have stepped in. I hope. But what did they bring specifically that God wanted to do in me? You see, there's no bravery in shrinking back and saying, well, I just don't have much to offer. The brave comes from placing who I am and what I have in God's hands. Have you ever been on a walk and something's in your shoe and you start, oh man, and you kind of hobble around a little bit and finally you get to a bench or something. It always happens when you're like on some trail and you take your shoe off and you look in and you're waiting for this big boulder to like crash out of your shoe, right? Because it's like totally affecting everything. It's bruising your, and you take it off and you look in there and what drops down? Like this little grain of sand. And you're thinking, that was it? I mean, just that little grain of sand and it changed everything for you. Well, here's what I want you to think about. In the same way, the little words you say, your faithfulness, the acts that you do, can sometimes help people change their walk. You may be that little grain of sand, hopefully not irritating, but a little grain of sand that changes the way someone begins to walk and move in life. It can be you. And isn't that what we're told to do? What did this little meal that this boy brought to Jesus, what did it mean to that huge crowd? It was a feast. In the same way, what can the little things you do mean to others? The truth is, they make a difference. In Luke 6, Jesus said this, if you give, you will receive, and your gift will return to you in full measure, pressed down, shaken together to make room for more, and running over. Whatever measure you use in giving, large or small, it will be used to measure what is given back to you. When we say, all I have is a little, but it's all yours, we're giving in full measure. And Jesus says, it will be given back to you. There will be blessings that come from that. You will see great things happen when you're willing to give generously. When we just kind of, a little bit here and there, that's kind of the results we get. Are we willing to take a step? This weekend, we're celebrating our kids and kids ministry. The story of this boy with the loaves and fishes. You see the impact of one child, and that could be you making a difference. I want you to sit back. We're ending the service here, but I want to show you just a quick little video. It's just about a minute and a half, and it's a video that our kids ministry put together. And you're going to see in this, as they hold up these kids, you're going to see hours that are written, numbers of hours. And if you've seen the videos over the last few weeks, you know that our time is limited with kids before they move into junior high and high school. And we have that limited amount of time. And you're going to see these kids hold up the hours. Those are the number of hours that we have left in ministry here to impact their lives. And it gets shrinking as they get older. But we can make a difference. So watch this video.
I could run across the ocean. Now I was gonna be an astronaut. When it was you and it was me, I had everything I needed. And faith could even move a mountaintop. And then I grew up, and then I got older, and my life got tough, and we grew apart. Jesus loves me, yes I know. For the Bible tells me, for the Bible tells me. I wanna go back to this little light, gonna let it shine, gonna let it shine. I wanna go back, wanna go back, wanna go back.
Do you see those faces? Do you see those? Yeah, you can give them a hand. Do you see those faces? Do you ever look at that and think, who in that group of kids are the next teachers and leaders? Who are the next, police officers and firefighters? Who are the next pastors and missionaries? Who are those who are going to serve in construction and raise families? And they're in that group. And what could God do through someone like you and someone like me? Just a willingness to step in. And I know some of you are thinking, man, I'd love to be able to like share and teach kids, because some of you have those gifts. I mean, that's fantastic. Some of you think, I couldn't do that. I don't know if you saw one of the guys in that video. His name was Jesse, and he was at the door. Did you see what he was doing? He was high-fiving kids. We all can high-five kids. Come on. I mean, whatever we have, we can use in that. And you could help shape and impact the next generation. And what it takes is a willingness to say yes. To say yes. Imagine what God could do with the little that you bring to make an impact for eternity. Would you pray with me? Father, thank you so much for your love and your mercy, for your grace. God, thank you for letting us see the faces of these kids and know that there's a whole future stretching out in front of them. That some of them are going to be helping people. Some of them are going to be teaching. Lord, there are world changers. There are passionate people who are going to go through college and get married and have kids. And some of them are going to take different paths. But God, in all of them, there's so much potential. And God, the question is, are we willing to take what we have, whatever it is, and say, okay, God, I'm going to trust you with this. I'm going to believe you, and I'm going to take a step of faith. For us to say yes to you and yes to the next generation. We love you. We thank you. God, I pray that you continue to stir our hearts. We pray this today in Jesus' name. Amen.